Do you see the button now?
I do, and it looks like it's loading. Okay, so I think the broadcast is live.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint and not really getting the slideshow, but let's see. Okay. So, Melissa, I think we're broadcasting live, and I have my intro slide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I just want to make sure it's on the presenter view, like presentation view.
Okay, so where is that now? Somehow I lost my, when I clicked on to see the people, I lost the okay. I don't, am I screen sharing or no?
We can see your screen, but we're just seeing it in PowerPoint. We're not actually seeing just the slide. So I think you probably want to go to presentation mode. Do you see on the bottom there, there's a little like pop-up screen next to the Zoom? Yeah, right there.
Yeah, for some reason that's not converting over to the slideshow.
Really?
It should be when you hit that one icon, it should be the slideshow.
Yeah.
You have multiple monitors, Tony? Because sometimes it pops up on behind a window on another monitor.
I do have multiple monitors, but I can put an end to that. Yep, looks like it, Brian.
There we go. That's perfect. All right, so we're broadcasting. We'll just hold here until 12 o'clock.
Okay. So Melissa, I'm seeing my full screen, so I'm not seeing any of the platform stuff like the chat and the attendees and so forth. Does it look like we have attendees? Can you hear me?
Yes, we have attendees.
Okay. Okay, it's 12 o'clock. Should we get started?
Yes.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first session. This session's on integrating the TAMP into the transportation planning process. I'm Tony Mento. I'm with the Federal Highway Administration out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Let me introduce Matt Smoker. He's a co-worker. Matt's one of our transportation planners. And Matt is going to be kind of a co-moderator. And he's going to help me with things like the chat pod and the Q&A. So what we did for this session is we pulled together 4 great speakers. And what I wanted to do is kind of go from the federal perspective to the state perspective to more of a local MPO type perspective, just so you can kind of see the difference in those levels of organizations. So as you can see from my slide, just to briefly introduce, and I'll introduce these folks before they speak, but we have Harlan Miller from the FHWA. We have Brian McNulty from PennDOT, Dave Gardner from Ohio DOT, and then Mike Boyer from our largest MPO in Philadelphia called DVRPC. So I'll introduce each as we go. We're going to run about 15 minutes. We kind of wanted this to be a little interactive, but unfortunately with this platform, it's a little hard to be interactive. So some of the logistics, you'll notice it should be in your upper right-hand corner. There's a place for questions, little Q&A. So if you have any specific questions, and we encourage you guys to think about some questions along the way, but you'll have to type them in the Q&A. If you have any other commentary, you can use the chat box, but unfortunately you can't really unmute and speak up. So you kind of have to type in your questions or your comments. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Harlan Miller. Harlan is a team leader with FHWA for our planning and stewardship and oversight team and headquarters. He's been with FHWA for about 30 years and is responsible for the development and implementation of federal regulations and guidance on transportation planning. He's also responsible for efforts to integrate operations, environment, asset management, and performance management into the transportation planning process. Prior to working for headquarters, Harlan worked in our Missouri division office and our Utah division office. Harlan has a master's in civil engineering from the University of Illinois and a BS in civil engineering from Arizona State. So at this time, I welcome Harlan, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Oh, sorry.
Nope, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Tony. See if I can launch my slide set here. Give me a minute. Okay, can folks see these slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, my name is Harlan Miller. I'm with the Federal Highway Administration. I'm in the Office of Planning with Federal Highways, and I'm going to talk to you about the integration of transportation asset management and performance management and transportation planning. All 3 of those elements really work together. So in my discussion, I'm going to talk about, first about transportation performance management, but I also want to talk about the national goal areas, of which I'm sure you're very familiar with. Also some of the roles and responsibilities of the not only federal highways, but our state DOT partners and MPO partners talk to you about some of the implementation timelines, talk about the performance measures that the federal government has established, and then transition into performance-based planning and programming, and then talk about the asset management piece and how these things kind of roll up into each other. Many of you, I think, have seen this. This is the framework for transportation performance management. There's really kind of 6 major steps in that framework. We start out with the national goals that Congress has given us. There's 7 of those. And to support those national goals, the Federal Highways was charged with putting specific performance measures together. And then once those measures were issued through rulemaking, there was a requirement for state DOTs and metropolitan planning organizations to set performance targets, and then to try to actualize those targets through various plans, including the transportation, long-range transportation plans, but also the asset management plan for the NHS. There is a reporting requirement where states and MPOs periodically report on progress towards target achievement, and the whole process is intended to be accountable and transparent. It's accountable in the fact that there's reporting on progress periodically, and it's transparent that each agency actually sets performance targets in a public venue. These are all the different rulemakings that have happened over the last 4 years. And it started with the safety performance measures, and then the transportation planning regulation came out in 2016. But we also have a rulemaking, obviously, for highway asset management plans, which came out right after the planning rule. And then there's requirements to set performance targets for bridge and pavement condition, as well as other performance areas for the NHS, including congestion and freight and emissions. So all of these rulemakings, even though they're separate rules, were developed in coordination with each other, and they actually link to each other. Now, I want to talk about some of those linkages. These are the 7 national goal areas. I won't go through the whole list, but you can see that they're kind of the high level areas that Congress is emphasizing to federal highways and the states and MPOs as far as how we spend our federal dollars and what we should be supporting these national goal areas. The performance management framework is actually in the regs in 23 CFR Part 490. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but there's actually 17 specific performance measures that Federal Highways has issued through all these rulemakings. And in 490, it describes all the criteria for what has to be met for states and MPOs to set targets for those measures, things like timelines and the performance periods, and how to demonstrate significant progress towards achieving those performance targets. Those 17 performance measures, I'm not going to go through a whole list of the 17 measures, but these are the areas they fall under. Safety, there's 5 measures. Pavement condition, which is, I think, of more interest to this group, because it's very tied into asset management. There's 4 measures for pavement condition, 2 measures for bridge condition. But there's also these other performance areas like system performance, which is really congestion and reliability of the system. There's a freight measure, and then there's 3 measures related to emissions and air quality. So if you total all these up, 17 different performance metrics that really govern not only the transportation planning process, but the other performance-based plans like the asset management plan. I'll be a little more specific on the infrastructure condition measures. There's 4 of them for pavements that I think you're very familiar with. It's essentially the percentage of pavements in good and poor condition on the NHS. It kind of bifurcated into interstate versus non-interstate highways. And then there's two bridge measures specifically, percent of bridge deck area classified in good condition and percent of bridge deck area classified in poor condition. This is the timeline that we're working under with the implementation of performance management. The interesting fact is that we just hit the 2-year point. You can see it on the map here. October 1st, 2020 is kind of the halfway point. It's a 4-year cycle where there was some baseline condition reporting that happened in October 2018. And now we're 2 years after that. And also target setting happened October 1st in 2018. And really the first reporting by the states was October 1st of this year at the 2-year midpoint. where states gave progress reports on how they're doing achieving those federal performance targets. And then the full performance period, the 4 years, goes out through October 1st of 2022, when there will be some final reporting. And then the cycle starts all over again with another 4 years cycle. And so what does this mean for our stakeholders? Well, starting with DOT and federal highways, we have to establish what those measures are. We have to report periodically to Congress on how states and MPOs are achieving those measures. And then we have to do oversight and stewardship with the states and MPOs on implementation. States and MPOs set the performance targets. They support the national goal areas in setting those targets, and they report periodically on progress to USDOT. And as we mentioned, the last report period was actually on October 1st of this year, the midpoint of the 2-year cycle. Federal Highways is committed to the success of the states and MPOs. Our philosophy is it's stewardship heavy and oversight light, that we want this to be successful, this whole implementation of performance management. We provide tools and policies and guidance to the states and MPOs. The division offices are our primary point of delivery of the program to the states. And we also have a resource center that provides technical implementation. State DOTs and MPOs, they're responsible for collecting the data, and they have to establish coordinated targets, meaning the states and MPOs have to work together in the target setting process, and they have to submit that data periodically and report on progress to federal highways. So that's the TPM framework. This is an implementation timeframe. I just wanted to share this to show that all the dates have come and gone. This is the implementation timeline specific to the planning process. So any updates or amendments to the planning documents have to be performance-based. And I'm going to describe what that means here in a minute. As we talked, the states and MPOs have to coordinate. When there's MPOs, are, of course, the metropolitan planning organizations, which are the governing organizations in the metropolitan areas. When each of the states and MPOs are setting performance targets, they have to coordinate to ensure consistency of their targets. An MPO can establish its own targets for each of those 17 performance metrics, or an MPO can adopt a state's performance target and help the state achieve their performance target. So either way, the MPOs are establishing targets, whether they adopt their own targets or they support the state's performance targets. There is a requirement to have written agreements in the metropolitan areas where the states and MPOs and also the transit agencies establish a written agreement describing how they're going to coordinate in that target setting process, and also how they're going to collect data, who's going to collect which data item for each of those 17 metrics, who's going to do the analysis, and how are they going to report on progress? How are the states and MPOs going to work together on that progress reporting? And then the last interesting thing that happened with MAP 21 and the FAST Act greatly expanded the mileage of NHS system. I think it went from like 180,000 to about 220,000 miles of NHS across the country. And a lot of that new NHS miles, not all of it, but a lot of it ended up being off the state system, depending on the state. And so this agreement, also the participants are to identify who's responsible for collecting the data for the NHS asset management plan, especially if those routes are off the state's system, if a local government owns those routes. And this ultimately, the state's obviously responsible for developing the state asset management plan, but the data collection could be a different story if some of the routes are off the state system, even though they're on the national highway system. This is one of the key linkage points between planning and asset management and transportation performance management, is that MAP 21 and the FAST Act, although they set out a lot of different plan requirements, not just the long-range plans that are in the planning process, there's also requirements to have the highway asset management plan from the NHS, which is in a whole different section of the law. It's a whole separate regulation. There's the strategic highway safety plan. There's also freight plans, congestion management process, and congestion management plan. Each of those separate plans has goals, objectives, performance metrics, and targets in it. And what the statute and the regulations requires that all those other plans be integrated into the transportation planning process itself. So if you have a highway asset management plan for the NHS, which every state does, all those things like the goals, objectives, performance metrics, finance plan, the strategies coming out of the state asset management plan have to be integrated into the statewide and metropolitan long-range plans, and also into the STIP and TIP. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. But it's not just asset management; it's all these other plans too that support the national goal areas. So the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the statewide plan, as part of that integration, shall also include performance measures and targets. These are those same 17 performance measures. And they shall include a description of progress made toward achieving the targets with each update of the statewide and Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And in the programming documents, which is another linkage program, the STIP, which is the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program, the list of funded projects for the next 4 years, and the NPO TIP, which is the NPO's list of funded projects, shall be designed to promote achievement of the performance targets in the statewide and metropolitan plan. And also to support that now, each of those documents also has to include a written narrative that describes exactly how they do that. So the STIP and the TIP not only have to list all the projects, but have to include a written narrative that describes how the program as a whole helps achieve the performance targets, each of those 17 performance targets, including the asset-related ones like bridge and pavement performance targets. And a big part of that is linking the asset management plan, the state asset management plan for the NHS to the STIP. And that the STIP should describe how the state asset management plan is being delivered through the list of projects in the STIP or the program as a whole. There is a consistency requirement. I think many or most of you have heard of this. States make annual consistency determinations for their TAMP, the Transportation Asset Management Plan, each year. And then Federal Highways reviews that TAMP each year. And that consistency determination really is two things. It's consistency of the TAMP with the asset management regulation that we talked about earlier, but it's also a determination by the state that the TAMP is actually being implemented. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. The consistency submission must show that the state is using investment strategies from its asset management plan to make progress towards achievement of those performance targets that we talked about for asset condition and performance of the NHS, and to help support making progress towards achieving those national goals of a state of good repair for highways and bridges. Federal Highways, this comes out of our guidance, by the way, Q&As. Federal Highways considers the best evidence of that linkage of the asset management plan implementation to be through funding allocations that the state DOT makes, and that those allocations are consistent with the investment strategies in the state's asset management plan. And that this demonstration considers the alignment between the actual and plan levels of investment. So and to simplify this, if the asset management plan has a funding identified for different work types, whether it's pavement resurfacing or pavement reconstruction or maintenance work or bridge deck repairs or bridge replacement, whatever those work types might be, whatever the financial plan or investment needs that are identified in the asset management plan should show up in the STIP, and that there should be projects programmed for those work types that are commensurate with the investment needs of the asset management plan. So that's a big linkage between asset management and the planning process. And again, all of this comes out of our regulations and guidance. We recognize that states also only invest their own funds. In some cases, it's not the whole program that's federally funded. There's also a state-funded program, so it's not just the STIP, but the state might also have their own capital improvement program identifying the state-funded projects, and that would be part of this demonstration too, that those lists of investment needs are also showing up in the state's capital improvement program if they're state-funded projects, and the federal-funded projects would show up in the STIP. And there's a ton of resources out there. I'm just about to wrap up here. Just want to share, and I think you've probably accessed many of these over the years. We've got some pretty good Q&As out there on the transportation asset management programming, including that demonstration of consistency of the TAM, the annual demonstration that the states do. There's a lot of material on the asset management website. AASHTO's been parking examples of the state asset management plans. They have a portal where they also park it. If you're interested in seeing what other states have for their asset management plan, visit AASHTO's portal. Also a link here to Federal Highway's final planning rule and our planning capacity building website. There's a lot on performance-based planning and programming parked on our website, including some case studies and guidebooks and things like that. There's a ton of NHI courses out there. Of course, with the current pandemic situation, in-person NHI courses are kind of on hold, but many of these have online versions of them and kind of shorter versions of them that you can also take online. And almost every topic area related to performance management, asset management, and performance-based planning has NHI type training available to it. These are good opportunities to bring your stakeholders together to kind of all together at one time to kind of discuss the implementations and requirements of some of these things. And I'll leave you with this last slide. This is the contact information. I'm in the planning office, and also Steve Gay is in the asset management office, or kind of the two primary contacts. I'm linking asset management and the planning process. So that's all I have. I'll stop sharing my slides and I'll turn it back to Tony Mento.
Great. Thank you, Harlan. That was a great federal perspective. Let me just pose to you maybe one quick question since we have a little bit of time. We know that the FAST Act recently expired. We're on an extension. Are you guys hearing anything, any rumors about the upcoming proposed legislation with respect to asset management and performance management? Any ideas of changes, or are we going to be, you think we're going to be kind of status quo?
Yeah, so some of the things we've been hearing from our stakeholders is kind of on performance management as a whole, and also asset management as a whole, that our stakeholders have pretty much been supportive of it, and both at the state DOT level and the MPO level, and that really they want to go through this implementation and get through a full cycle before really any major changes are made to either of those programs. So I think Congress kind of feels the same way. There might be some minor tweaking around the edges. We might see some additional performance metrics, for example. We saw that in some of the draft legislation. There were kind of 2 or 3. I think climate change was one that some of the legislation suggested, and connectivity, which is more of a mobility type measures. And but once we get through a full 4-year cycle, which we've got 2 years left on the performance management, I think we'll be kind of revisiting our regulations to see did we really pick the right measures, or do we need to make some changes to it. But overarchingly, I think there's been a lot of support for it.
Good. All right, thanks. And at the end, we'll have a chance for some more questions and comments. But let's now kind of move down to the state level a little bit. I want to introduce Brian McNulty, who is the PennDOT District Executive for PennDOT District 1, which is kind of the northwest corner of Pennsylvania. And up there, Brian leads a team of over 800 employees dedicated to preservation, maintenance, and construction of around 4,000 miles of roadway and about 2,000 bridges. Brian actually started his career in the private sector and joined PennDOT in District 1 around 2011 and worked his way up through the ranks to recently be nominated as the district executive. So we're very fortunate to have Brian up in the district there. Brian has a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Pittsburgh and is also a registered professional engineer in Pennsylvania. So with that, Brian, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tony. And can somebody just confirm they can see my screen and hear me talking?
Yes, you're good.
Great. Thank you. Just as sort of a segue from Harlan's presentation, I guess I'd echo what he said as we talk about the TAMP and transportation performance management and performance-based planning and programming and all of those items that are interconnected from PennDOT's perspective, we're on board. We like this approach. It makes a lot of sense. I don't think you could argue that. So, you know, I guess even if there's parts of my presentation that might highlight some of the challenges that we see ahead, we're excited about this initiative in general. I've shown a map of Pennsylvania on my first slide, 67 counties, 24 different planning organizations, MPOs, RPOs, 1 independent county, and 11 PennDOT districts. So we have a lot of variety there. And of course, you have urbanized areas like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, to more rural areas, which again, my district is District 1, northwest corner of the state, much more rural in that area. A lot of different ways that all those different organizations interact right now as far as how we plan, you know, develop our transportation plans. So I would say that wanted to mention that up front, and in my first in a previous position as planning and programming manager for District 1, during my first TIP update, I struggled through some of that process of what we were doing and why, what tools we had or didn't have that I felt we should. And really, it was difficult, and it was not always, we had very good processes in place, but I really see a lot of opportunity and prospect in the new tools that we're developing through the TAMP and how we might use them. All that being said, I guess if the question that's posed to me is how is PennDOT integrating the TAMP with transportation planning, you know, as a spoiler alert, the answer is we don't really know, to be honest with you. You know, it's not an unknown unknown. We know what the goal is. We know where we need to get to, but because there are so many different organizations, so many different sort of ways of putting together long range plans and tips, of course, they're all somewhat similar, but different. So that process will look a little bit different, and you'll get sort of a statewide perspective along with my district perspective. So just an overview of what I'll be going over is probably, if I do this right, I'll talk most about the culture change that this represents. So there's a few other things I want to address in there, but I would say, you know, that's my takeaway, is that this does represent a significant change, and that it's going to take time to get that in place. So we've taken, I think, some great steps on the most recent TIP update. We'll take additional steps as that goes on, as you know, time goes on. And I guess I must be a glass is half full kind of guy. So, you know, I kind of debated on what kind of images I might include in my presentation. I have a picture of a pretty poor looking piece of interstate pavement here. And I guess I think we should all keep in front of us that we have a lot of big challenges with regard to asset management. So as far as the TAMP is concerned, I was not involved in the development of the TAMP. Credit for that goes to Mike Long, our Chief of Asset Management Division, and his team. They did a great job. I'm familiar with the document and what it means to us now. And this is a great image. You're not going to see any calculus or anything too complex for me in this presentation, but I like this kind of image. It shows the benefits of approaching things with using lowest life cycle costs. So you get more bang for your buck. It's no different than how you treat an automobile or a house. The question is, you know, can we get to here? And I think we all want to get to this place. The TAMP also gave us BAMs and PAMs. So our bridge asset management system and pavement asset management system, both in slightly different places as far as their development and the access that we have to them, but both are working, giving output, and both need, you know, a little bit more refinement, but really impressive tools from what I've seen so far that I think are going to help us a lot. So I guess, you know, in line with transportation performance management and the TAMP, a significant effort that had to be undertaken is a look at how we're investing our funds. So is redistribution necessary? And the answer is yes. You know, to meet these targets and goals, we need to look at where we're putting our money. The Interstate Steering Committee started this process several years ago, and probably many of you have seen this type of slide before, but what they found was that our interstates, which in Pennsylvania are managed at the statewide level as its own statewide separate TIP, we were funding them at less than half of what we should have been. So recent historic investment has been about $500 million a year, and we found in, I think, 2018 that we should be investing $1.2 billion per year. So we fall short there. We have for some time. This graph just represents with the new TIP update, the 21 TIP update, how our financial guidance was changed so that some of those funds would be redirected from regional TIPs towards the interstate. So basically adding additional funds every year until 2028, where we would be at about the $1 billion mark. Still really far short of that 1.2 that we identified back in 2018. So you add 10 years of inflation, and again, we're still not meeting that amount that is really just to keep pavements and bridges on cycle. It's not, doesn't include any capacity adding, doesn't include modernization or anything like that. So a success here, but it wouldn't be a transportation asset presentation if I didn't whine a little bit about the fact that we just don't have as much money as we need. And as far as the interstate TIP goes, we have used BAMs and PAMs, especially PAMs, to validate the addition of new projects. So Asset Management Group is working with the Program Center to check those new additions just to make sure that they're consistent with the overall plan. And then shifting slightly to more of a district focus, we recognized, I guess, that the same effort probably needed to be undertaken for our regional TIPs or at the district level. So similar to what the Interstate Steering Committee did, we took a similar look, and I guess I'd say, a couple of things came to light. And in a district like District 1, it's a different setting. Our planning partners, MPOs, RPOs, all excellent to work with and highly skilled, but they generally have a staff of 1 or 2. So very different than DVRPC or other larger MPOs. We find that sort of why I showed that map that, some of our planning partners have an appetite they want this data. They want, BAMs and PAMs output. They want to play with it themselves and work with it in that way, and others do not. So sort of something that we found, that was important for us to do is from the district to go to each of our planning partners and share some transportation knowledge that we have there. So we gave a Bridges 101 presentation to all of our planning partners for folks that might be on those coordinating committees who are voting on transportation decisions. We wanted to educate those folks. It might be a rural township supervisor who's on that board who might not know when we talk about substructure, superstructure, decks, etc., condition ratings and all those kinds of things. Tried to put that in an accessible format to share that information. We did a similar effort with pavements. So that slide that I'm showing now are a few pieces out of that pavements presentation where we talked about flexible pavements versus rigid and how long can you expect to get out of a wearing surface or a resurfacing project. How important is the condition of the base and all that kind of thing. And then we followed that with an asset management presentation where we talked about some dollars and cents a little bit more. And this is just an example of how we approach that. So this is sort of walking, I would say, right alongside the TAMP, but also looking at it from a district perspective. We're not going to come up with a totally different method for programming NHS routes versus other federal aid routes. So we looked at what we considered our betterment network. These are all routes this is all NHS in Mercer County, plus various other routes with criteria that's based on ADT and that kind of thing, where we're going to apply a similar treatment. You might call this our high-level bituminous network. This is everything except for interstates and what we might treat as a seal coat route, roughly. And so when you have that data and what your cycles are, your goal cycles, it's pretty easy to get to a needs. So that's what we presented was for these needs. Now, 8.5 million probably doesn't sound like a huge challenge to some, but this is a TIP that has a total of $13.4 million per year. And previous betterment line items were about 4.5 million. So this represents a huge change when we present this to that committee to say that we need significantly more than half of the total TIP funds. And in fact, if you take out federal state bridge funds and you take out federal safety funds, the Mercer TIP doesn't even have 8.4 left. So this is still an area where we're not going to meet our goal on the other networks besides the interstate. So this is difficult. This is part of the funding and culture change that I was talking about. This led to very difficult TIP development, very difficult conversations with our friends and partners there, and resulted in a compromise on both sides. But I think if you put yourself in their position, it doesn't make them real excited, I don't think, to think that we PennDOT are saying, hey, there's not a dime available for any project, not even a relatively small one that might enhance, that might come directly from the long range transportation plan and be of a high priority to a community in their county. So this is part of what's really tough here, the financial reality. Similarly, culture change. So this, we probably, many of us have seen this chart before. It's the result of redirected investment into bridges over the course of a decade. And it's also generally has been a worst first approach. So we've done good work. I would never look back and say, oh, why did we do this? I think it, obviously has great value. We've come a very long way. And now it's just time to pivot and sort of change the way we look at this. What this chart doesn't show are the many preservation projects that should have been done that were not, because we were really trying to focus on those SD or poor bridges. So, that's part of the culture change. And I guess I definitely wouldn't try to speak for all district bridge engineers, but I think in general and in District 1, we welcome this change. We're very comfortable with it, understanding that, just because a deck just turned poor yesterday doesn't mean that we need to hit the panic button necessarily. We might have 10 years, we might have 20 years left in that deck. So those are the kind of decisions that we are already doing differently. And speaking of BAMs, this is what the output looks like. You don't need to be able to see this, but basically it does a lot of different things. And in this case, it's showing each bridge ID and the recommended course of work, or it gives you a work plan, really. Everything from county maintenance, deck repairs to a full replacement. So this has been very useful. And I see my time's running a little bit short here, so I'm going to kind of speed through this, but very helpful output. It's based on the funds that you have, so it has been very useful. And as we use it to validate our decisions, it's been very accurate, and I would say pretty consistent with what we've been doing. Other outputs of BAMs are, it will give you a report of how you should be investing, preservations, rehabs, reconstructions, etc. And it gives you that condition projection or that forecast of, at current funding levels, if you apply the lowest life cycle cost approach, this is how your conditions will change over however many years. PAMs is similar. So it gives you that work that's due on each logical section pavement, or you can input a project and it can confirm whether your scope is consistent. So it tells everything from crack sealing to full reconstruction, and similar to BAMs, can give you those types of output for conditions. And so in conclusion, culture change is tough. Funding changes are tough. Those two things being separate are each difficult on their own, and in this case, we sort of have combined them together. It's difficult to do, but we think it's the right thing to do. The redirection of funding is sort of step one that's consistent with all these goals, and we've taken those steps already. And then as far as what's next, BAMs and PAMs, they are powerful tools. We've used them in long-range plan developments in District 1. We've used them to validate TIP decisions, and the more we use them, the more accurate we think they're going to become. So, we're excited about what we can do with them in the future on future updates. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Brian. Appreciate that PennDOT overview, and I've been part of it for several years. And you touched on some real key points about the cultural change. We know that that's been challenging. The redirection of funds. PennDOT did a great job. When they looked at allocating funds to the planning partners, they now start to consider condition and performance, as opposed in the old days they were just kind of dividing the money up based on some other criteria. So PennDOT has come a long way, but I think you're correct. This is more of a journey. It's not a flip of a switch, and there's a lot of challenges ahead. So appreciate that perspective. We have a few questions in the chat pod or in the Q&A, but we're going to hold those till the end. Let me switch over to Dave Gardner from Ohio DOT. We're honored to have Dave with us, and Dave is currently serves as the administrator for the Office of Technical Services, where he oversees the TAMP, Highway Infrastructure Management, Traffic Monitoring, and Information Management. And prior to being the administrator, Dave was the manager of ODOT's Traffic Monitoring Program. He started his career with ODOT as a planner and a planning supervisor for the modeling and forecasting section. Dave has a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's in public administration from Ohio University. It's a pleasure to have Dave with us. And Dave, I don't know if you're aware of this, but working in Pennsylvania, Ohio has a very similar program. So we always look at what you guys are doing. We look at your specifications. Sometimes we steal a few. We look at your processes and procedures. Just to, have a frame of reference or maybe look for some best practices. So it's great to have you, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Dave.
Great, Tony. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's in working in other areas of ODOT, I can say that we do the same thing. It's great to collaborate with everybody and learn what everybody else is doing. And so it works both ways. So certainly appreciate that. That's not where I thought you were going. I was going to say, as you mentioned, I'm with the Ohio Department of Transportation here in Columbus, but coincidentally, it's the home of a local Big Ten university and a rival to some of my PennDOT and Penn State colleagues on here. So assuming things stay well over the next couple of weeks, we'll be rooting for our respective teams here in 2 weeks, I think. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. It should be a big day over in State College here in a couple Saturdays. So anyway, that's where I thought you were going to go, Tony. But I at least wanted to mention Ohio State. So.
Well, since you went there, Dave, I'm a Syracuse guy. I wasn't going to wear my hat because this is a Penn State conference, but Syracuse has had some good rivalries with you guys.
Absolutely. Well, it's just good to be watching some athletics again here, no matter actually what it is. So anyway, thank you again. Just to give a quick overview of our assets here at ODOT, we have approximately 150 $15 billion worth of assets, which obviously is quite substantial. And you can see there that pavements and bridges are the significant portion of the 65 billion and 22 billion respectively. Then we have 2 billion in culverts and another 26 billion in all of our other assets. And in a time of dwindling resources, we have to squeeze more out of all of our dollars and that we spend in whether it's on repairs or on new construction. And asset management really helps us with that and kind of sets the stage for it and sets the course for us in doing so. For us, maintenance, obviously, and for a lot of other DOTs, maintenance is it's the name of the game. In Ohio, we have close to 43,000 miles of roads. We have 14,000 bridges and 80,000 culverts that we have to care for and maintain. So that's a lot of inventory and requires a lot of resources. And so this type of program is obviously for us to squeeze those as much as we can out of those dollars and use them wisely and use them effectively. So and that goes into what we're discussing here is the integration of the TAMP within our STIP process, and that's primarily my discussion today. Asset management and STIP integration it's inherent part of our entire planning process. So a few points about our STIP process. We at ODOT update this biannually. It starts with our rural consultation meetings that we have with them, and the coordination continues between ODOT and all of our local agencies regularly. It's a performance-based plan, processing and utilizing measures collected and implemented in ODOT's transportation asset management program. So this is large, obviously, and there's tons more detail we could go into, but obviously in the end, it's working together with everyone around our state to implement these strategies. At ODOT, we consider it beginning with our strategic plan. And a few key points from our plan are that we obviously, number one, improving safety. Taking care of what we have, maintenance obviously, and all the roads or all the pavement, bridges, culverts, etc. Taking care of that inventory and spending our dollars wisely. We want to make our system better, whether that's through improvements to the roadway, whether that is designing different performance measures out of different methods of engineering, planning, construction that makes our system work better, and enhancing capacity. An example of enhancing capacity for us has been we've implemented a couple projects around the state this year where we've utilized hard shoulder running, and it's an amazing accomplishment on the impacts of that hard shoulder running. One specifically here in Columbus, where during these peak hours, we allowed traffic to utilize those lanes, and the impact on congestion was amazing, absolutely amazing. So for the cost of doing that project and the benefits out of it, the benefits certainly outweighed the costs in this case. But we're looking at ways like that to make our system better and work smarter with what we have.
Hey, Dave.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt you for a minute?
Sure.
It doesn't look like your slides are advancing. Are they supposed to be moving?
Yes, they should be.
Okay.
Thank you, Melissa. I wish you had said something earlier.
It was the audience that said it. I was just kind of in the background, but they typed in the chat that they couldn't see it. So
no problem.
I was speaking.
Here we go. Yeah, sorry for that. You get an idea of what I was talking about in each one of those slides. They're pretty minimal here, but hopefully these slides will be available. So my apologies for not we're not scrolling through them. So as I was talking there, improving safety, there's our strategic plan, there's our items. And so along with the STIP, and now that you say that, Melissa, I am clicking on, there we go. A little bit of a delay. We obviously have a large and significant responsibility. You know, so how are we achieving these goals? We do that by utilizing data incorporated in the TAMP. And critical success factors are we identify those and monitor them. So this is an example of one of our dashboards that we utilize and update regularly from a critical success factor standpoint. You can see there, safety on pavement conditions, for fatality, serious injuries, congestion reliability, snow and ice removal, pavement conditions on our priority and general systems, and then bridge conditions. So obviously just a few of those that I've got listed there, but to look at it in a little bit more detail is in looking at pavement specifically. This is a breakdown for that of a dashboard that we utilize, and I realize, and I apologize, this is probably somewhat tough to see, but this is it. This is information and data that we're collecting and utilizing to report on a regular basis. So you can see that our goal here in this respect is 85 for an average PCR executive management, in conjunction with our districts and partners to determine, as part of that strategic plan, where we as a department should be. So again, another mechanism that we utilize to maintain the reporting process for looking at these strategic goals and the critical success factors that go with them. So those critical success factors are incorporated into our annual district work plan process. This is a quick summary and schedule of our district work plans, or our district work plan schedule. We do that by establishing the critical success factors. Obviously, as we talked about there before, we conduct the asset inventories and inspections, which is typically done through the March-November time periods. And to elaborate a little bit more on that, we currently utilize, or we have in place in each one of our districts, what they call TAMP coordinators, and they work in conjunction with central office planning to basically kind of be the go-to person in each one of the districts for utilizing our collector applications, utilizing the data, setting up standards for utilization by the districts for all the asset management data that we collect. So we rely on them heavily as a resource for this data collection effort, which is consistent across the state and everybody within the district. We conduct the pavement management optimization, which usually is in the December timeframe. The district allocations are presented in January. The district draft project selections then are done in the January through March timeframe. The districts then finalize each of their projects, which is done in April. And I'll show you a slide here. We go through a district work plan meeting around that time every year, just to discuss and present basically the projects that the districts intend to put out as part of their annual work plan. And then project delivery obviously is continual, and then the district monitoring for all these projects is quarterly. This is an example of a slide that one of the districts use or have used to report as part of that annual work plan process. So our planning folks, all of our main central office administrators, staff, executive management meet annually with each of the districts individually to go over their work plan process. And I just pulled briefly out, this is an example of information presented during one of those meetings that the districts have put together. Again, I mentioned that the PCR goal during this time was 85. And that's for our priority system, which is our functional class 1s and 2s. And then it's an 80 for what we call our general system. And that's roadways outside our municipalities with a population of 5,000 or more. So they break them down in those different functional classifications of road to address them differently with obviously different pavement treatments, projects as an example. So the districts are accountable for achieving the goal, and the data that's collected as part of that asset management program, as I mentioned, that's where we utilize and depend upon the TAM coordinators utilizing folks out of the districts in each one of the counties, or be it out of the district office. They're the ones that help us tremendously in this effort to collect this data. Using pavements, again, as an example, the projects are produced utilizing the pavement management processes, as Brian mentioned up there with, I think, PAMS is what you called it. We call it the pavement management system, and it is all part of our pavement management process. And I'm not going to go through each one of these items in the decision tree, but once it gets through that process, be it through pavement management system or through what's currently our bridge management system, these projects then are entered into our Ellis system, which is our project planning and management and accounting software. Once these districts have reviewed their list of projects that have been generated and created outside those systems. In ODOT's case, we concentrate on entering good data into the black box that includes PCR targets over a specific time frame. 2 work plans are created or come out of this planning process. It's one's the capital and one is the maintenance. We combine them into one collaborative plan. We input data and review the black box outputs. They huddle with each of the districts, TAM coordinators, make sure the data is correct, planning staff, and so forth. They obviously know much more about the projects, the situation, the data in each one of their districts, more than most likely us in central office. But in the end, 2 plans come out, capital plan and a maintenance plan. And again, we work with our partners to combine those 2 plans into one collaborative plan. This is just another screenshot of our Ellis system. It's again updated with all of our data. This is our project management software. The projects are coordinated by the districts with their local partners. The data is then utilized as basically the foundation for the STIP. So similar as Brian mentioned, we've got some different tools that we utilize, different mechanisms that we're making this data available. Starting at the foundations with the collection of the information in each one of the districts, and then obviously our different processes that we do or that we utilize to build each one of the project lists. So just to summarize, obviously the data tells us what we're doing, what we need to be doing, and what isn't working. It shows us the trends, it shows us the pattern, and it helps us do obviously planning for our asset management plan and for our projects, and how we use and spend our transportation funds wisely to benefit our roadways and benefit our public. So in the end, these are some items that we do to monitor for continuous improvement. We use our critical success factors, establishing our performance targets, identify those gaps in those, and then make adjustments to our capital and maintenance program. So Melissa, thank you for letting me know to continue moving through those slides, but that's what I have today. Thank you all for your attention, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. So Tony, that's all I have. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dave. And I do see a lot of similarities between what you guys are doing and what PennDOT is doing. Dave, there is a quick question. Why don't I throw it in here now? But somebody was asking if your dashboard, which was a couple slides before the end there, is that available on your website? It was a nice looking dashboard.
Yes, those dashboards are available. And
okay.
I can put an address out there. I assume we're making these slides available at some point.
Yeah, I think we are. Yes.
I'll put the address in that slide that's respective to it, so that way it's available for anybody who wants to get access to it.
Great, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Thank
okay,
you.
So let's continue to move along. I want to kind of go to the more of a local level, so to speak, and I want to introduce Michael Boyer. Michael's with he's the Associate Director for Comprehensive Planning at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. We call it DVRPC, which is one of our largest, it is our largest MPO in Pennsylvania. It's kind of a 9-county region around Philadelphia. There, Michael oversaw the development of the region's long-range plan, which was created through an extensive public outreach and stakeholder engagement process. He also manages DVRPC's freight and aviation planning, safe streets, congestion management, air quality, and socioeconomic and land use analytics program, and has taken the lead role in developing DVRPC's performance-based planning efforts. So fully entrenched in everything that the feds are requiring. Michael received a bachelor's degree in geography and urban studies from Temple and a master's of city planning from the University of Pennsylvania. And we're honored to have Michael, again, DVRPC. I consider these folks to be the experts when it comes to planning. You know, they're involved with New Jersey. They got everything going on in their region. So Michael, with that, I'll turn it over to you for some of your perspectives.
Thanks, Tony, for the intro and for the invite to present today. Just before starting here, could you verify if you can see my screen and hear me?
I can, yes.
Great, thanks. So, as Tony noted, I will be giving an MPO perspective today. It's not the MPO perspective, as Brian noted. Even in Pennsylvania, we have many different sizes of MPOs, and they each do a little bit of a different approach. We're fortunate that we're rather large. We have about 120 people on staff, and several of them are devoted to things like TAMP and transportation performance management. So, it's our perspective, and hopefully there's some stuff that can be gleaned from what we have been doing. Just a little bit of an introduction. As Tony noted, we are rather unique in that we are a bi-state MPO. We cover 5 counties in Pennsylvania and 4 counties in New Jersey. We have 351 municipalities. Both Pennsylvania and New Jersey are home rule states, and that's quite a lot of partners there. We primarily, however, work through our counties. So for 18 board members, we have our 9 counties, as well as 3 cities, and the rest are representatives from the governors of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. We are a rather large region. We have about 5.75 million people, 3.2 million jobs. Moderate growth going out to the year 2045. That's the horizon year of our long-range plan. You see some figures there for daily VMT and daily transit trips, primarily just to show that it is a rather large and extensive system. It's also a pretty old system, which is one of the challenges we face in terms of preserving, maintaining, and upkeeping that extensive transit system, particularly as Brian noted, in light of rather serious funding constraints. The last figure there is our long-range plan. That was, we update that every 4 years. It was last adopted in 2017. We did a minor update this past year, but we're due for a new long-range plan in 2021. We've incorporated all the TPM measures that Harlan noted in his presentation in that amendment, but the update that we're working on now for adoption next September is really our first long-range plan that will be developed with the transportation performance management requirements. So in terms of performance-based planning and programming, we do have a requirement now with transportation performance management mandate, but we have actually been doing this for quite a few years. And initially, we started looking into performance-based planning and programming to make sure that we were making the best transportation investment decisions. And our long-range plan is very far-reaching. It looks at land use, it looks at the economy, it looks at the environment. But I think most people are really interested in what transportation investments we're making. And the TIP is the short-term embodiment of that. It actually programs that giant wish list that's in the long-range plan. And, both of those, because of those funding constraints, we really wanted to make sure that those investments were really getting us sort of our best bang for the buck. I also have listed the congestion management process there. That's another key document that we rely on to guide that performance-based planning process. So I will show here, and I am going to sort of look at how we integrate TAMP through the long-range planning lens. Primarily, that's because that's what my background is, but also because the plan is really our guiding document as an MPO. It looks out 25 plus years, and then the tips are more the short-term embodiment of that. So they're all on the same plane, but really we really incorporate the performance-based planning and programming as we develop the plan. And I'm sharing this slide here, which are the 5 core principles of our plan. And that is key because everything we do in performance-based planning and programming ties back to these 5 core principles. We went through a rather extensive visioning process, a lot of public and stakeholder outreach to define these principles. There are a whole slew of goals and strategies that had been developed that fall under each of these 5 core principles. And this is really what we're trying to achieve through our performance-based planning process. Now, the first thing in terms of developing that plan that we do is we look at a whole bunch of trends. We develop some forecasts, and this is all developed under our tracking progress indicators projects. And we update this every long-range plan cycle. One of the things we use this for is to gauge how well we are achieving our long-range plan goals. It's our real rudimentary, I think, first step in terms of performance monitoring. It also helps us prioritize the goals for the long-range plan update. So we look at each of the over 30, and you only see a handful of the indicators that we track here on the screen. But we look at those, and every 4 years, there's some that we are doing better than others. And looking at the dashboards, we're trying to concentrate on the areas that we are really lagging in. And those really become the focus areas for that plan update iteration. This also helps lay the groundwork for assessing needs. And those various performance measures that Harlan outlined in his presentation, those 17 performance measures that are included in our TPM, we now monitor as part of tracking progress. So that also helps us look at what our overall needs are. And you can see here specifically on the screen, we have pavement condition, bridge condition, and transit condition. And we monitor several indicators under each of those. The needs assessment is the next step then, and the tracking progress indicators help us to identify what areas we need to focus on. But over the past 4 or so long-range plan update cycles, and that's going back about 15 years now, we have been doing more of a quantitative needs assessment. We always had an idea that we had much more in terms of what we needed to accomplish than we had revenues to do. But the needs assessment really has allowed us to quantify what that gap is. And we are currently looking at an order of magnitude of twice as much needs as we have forecast revenue for over the life of the long range plan. So for that needs assessment, we utilize both the New Jersey and Pennsylvania bridge management system and pavement management systems. We have 3 transit agencies that we work with, SEPTA in Southeastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey Transit in New Jersey, and PACO, which is bi-state. They each have developed their own transit asset management plans, and we utilize those for our regional long-range plan. Now, one of the key challenges we have is each of those agencies only go out between 10 to 12 years. And as we develop a long-range plan with a 25 plus year planning horizon, we have had to do a lot of additional work to extend a lot of those things out to the year 2045 in the case of our current long-range plan. Similar processes to others have described here. We're looking at identifying condition improvements resulting from various interventions, looking again for the lowest cost one. But it's a whole life cycle cost assessment that we have incorporated into this that has allowed us to not just see what the needs are now, but what they will be over those 25 plus years of the long range plan. One of the things we have done with that needs assessment is a little bit of a scenario planning exercise as we develop our financial plan for that long range plan. So here is one example, just looking at percentage of deck area in poor condition. We developed a low, medium, and high funding scenario, and we were able to show what we were able to accomplish under each of those scenarios in various areas. So bridge deck area is one. We looked at pavement condition. We looked at transit vehicle age. And that would really help guide the conversation for the next step. And this step here is probably the most difficult as we develop our long-range plan. So we have a good idea of what revenues we will have over the life of the plan. We know what the needs are, but actually trying to allocate that funding across different needs is really where we spend most of our time in our long-range plan development. So what you see here on the screen is, for the plan, we have separate funding pots for Pennsylvania and New Jersey because they each have their own TIPs. And we also have broken them down into roadway and transit. So just concentrating here on the roadway funding pots for both Pennsylvania and New Jersey. The larger circle you see there for Pennsylvania is our unfunded division. that is our total needs over the life of the plan. And you can see it's a pretty large amount. The blue amount is what we forecast to have funding available for, and it's less than half of what the need is. So the challenge there is we have limited funding, a lot higher amount of needs, and the challenge is how we're going to allocate those limited resources. And you can see in the smaller circle there on the far left, that is how, through various conversations with our planning partners, we settled on a split for that funding. The two biggest chunks of the pie there are bridges and pavement. And together they account for over 81% of total funding in our long range plan. So obviously that is one of the key focus areas. That earlier slide where I had the 5 core principles, one of the goals in there, one of the policies that came out of our visioning exercise was we as a region decided we are going to prioritize preservation and maintenance projects, followed by operational improvements. And then our third priority would be system expansion. And that has followed through then with how we are actually allocating that funding. So after we allocate to those various pots, the next and the final step is to decide what specific projects. So we have a pot of funding for bridge rehab, reconstruction, replacement. In this step here, we will actually list what projects we will be doing. Now, for the long range plan, we just focus on major regional projects. Those are larger scale projects. Obviously, over a 25 plus year plan, we don't know every single bridge that we are going to be rehabbing, particularly in the out years of the plan. So we do maintain a balance in there to account for those smaller projects, but we do know which of the bigger projects we will be addressing over the next 25 plus years. And to select those, we have developed a set of universal project evaluation criteria. And this was done over about a year and a half. We held about 9 meetings with our planning partners. We had a lot of discussion in terms of what we should be rating, and then more importantly, how we would rate them, what measures we would use to rate them. We used a tool called Decision Lens. It's a consensus building software. And based on that, we did a whole set of one-off pairings. So we asked our planning partners, what's more important to you, safety or equity? And they would vote. What's more important, safety or the environment? And based on that voting, we ended up weighting these various parents you see on the left-hand side. Now, we had also worked with them to come up with some children on the right-hand side there. And I'm going to focus here on the next few slides on the facility asset condition and maintenance. That's really the TAMP component of our project evaluation criteria. And they broke down the preservation and maintenance weighting. And you see there was the second highest rating parent at 22% into various children. And those children were bridges, pavement, other assets, including transit, and then agency operating costs. And you can see how those children were broken out from that 22%. We do this every 4 years before we start developing our long-range plan. And they do change. So for this round, safety made a huge jump. I think previously they were around 15%. They are now weighted as 27%. And one of the reasons that occurred is because our transportation performance management measures for safety were particularly lagging. I think That has been a real challenge for our region as well as many others to achieve those safety targets. So that was a concerted effort, I think, by our planning partners to place more of an emphasis on safety in project selection. But moving on to focus on the TAMP and that second line item there. So facility asset condition and maintenance account for 22% of the total weighting for a project. Another note too is these are universal because we also use these for both our Pennsylvania and TIP projects. As we develop those TIPs every other year, we go through a similar process for those projects. So as you can see here for bridges and pavement, we do use the BAMs and the PAMs. So they each have a bridge or a pavement improvement score. And you can see a whole explanation there of how that is calculated. But basically, the highest score gets 1 point. And then we scale all the other projects that we're looking at from that. So that gives us a good weighting of those projects on that scale. The other components for this measure are the other, but again, that's primarily transit. So our scale there is 1 point if the improvement brings the asset from poor condition to a state of good repair. And then 0.6 of a point if the project extends the useful life of a facility asset that's not in poor condition. And the discussions pretty much circulated around that we wanted to give those projects some credit as we were assessing them. And then the final component there is the agency operating costs. And a lot of our planning partners were cognizant that preservation and maintenance is important. We do have some projects, though, that as part of that preservation maintenance may have some significant new costs associated with them. And they're typically associated with preservation and maintenance as part of a system expansion project. So in order to make sure that we were kind of elevating more so the pure system preservation projects, we came up with this agency operating cost component. And this is particularly important for transit agencies. So that, hopefully I think that can give you an idea of our process. As we went through this, we were trying to tie back to those long range plan goals, as well as meet those transportation performance management targets. I think fortunately for us, those are pretty much aligned and have been aligned for quite some while. One of the challenges we've had, though, is while preservation and maintenance is surely a concern for our region, there are a lot of other concerns, and safety in particular is an area that is gaining more interest in terms of promoting. Equity is also an area that we are seeing more concern with from our planning partners. So trying to juggle all those competing needs, in a realm of constrained funding is what I would say is probably our biggest challenge moving forward. So thank you for your time and for allowing me to share our experience.
Great. Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. And I wasn't sure exactly how DVRPC was factoring in the asset condition in their project evaluation criteria. So that was very informative. I appreciate that. So we have about 5 or 7 minutes left. Let me go to the Q&As. And Harlan, there's a question in here. It says, can you speak to the penalties in a case where the state may not be consistent with the investment strategies in their plan? So, yeah, we maybe talk about some of the penalties with the performance management side of things.
Yeah, so for the asset management consistency, there is a potential penalty in there. I think the match for National Highway System funds can be reduced to like 65% federal share is the penalty for if there's a consistency issue.
Yeah, yeah. And PennDOT has not had that problem. We were able to grant their consistency determination for the last 2 years. And I don't think, I'm not aware of any states that had an issue with that. So
I don't think there. Yep.
Okay, great. There's another question from Bert. It talks about, with the funding difficulties, does the FHWA foresee a transportation infrastructure bill in the future? I can give you my 2 cents, and Harlan, maybe you can give us a better Washington perspective. I know the administration has worked on an infrastructure bill. It never got a lot of legs, and I think it was kind of put on the back burner now that we're into an election season and all that kind of stuff. I do think we're going to get a new legislation probably sometime next year. My guess is maybe the infrastructure bill will be folded into the new highway legislation. But Harlan, any thoughts on that?
Sure. So we're under a 1-year extension right now that got passed kind of at the nth hour that takes us through September 30th of next year. And that was kind of built into it. And early on, the House put some draft legislation to extend the existing program for a year. So we kind of knew for a while that this was coming. And so hopefully by October 1st of next year, we will have new transportation legislation. They've always developed like 5 or 6 year transportation bills. I mean, we have a long history of that. So there might be some extensions after October 1st of next year that are kind of piecemeal, hopefully not. But the other factor that's really playing into this is we're going to have a new Congress, and we might have a new administration on top of that. So it's almost like starting all over. Usually the new Congress doesn't really commit to things that the previous Congress has developed, and that's the same with the administrations too. So there's going to be a lot of work behind the scenes where the committees are going to be redrafting some things. Both the House and Senate had draft bills at one time, as did the administration, and so a lot of that's going to kind of start all over again because of the new Congress and whatever happens with the administration, depending on the outcome of that.
Yeah, and we did see some of those drafts of those House and Senate bills, and there was an increase in those bills, but not an awful lot. As Michael pointed out, my gosh, we could probably double our revenue investment and still just stay afloat. So I guess there's a lot to be seen next year. So with that, we're just about out of time. I think we've answered all the questions. Let me just double check. Well, there is one here for Michael. Can you share your child's scoring criteria for safety? So that was your slide where safety was number 1, and you had kind of the parent and the child. So they're looking for child's safety criteria. There you go.
So for safety, there really wasn't a child, but we do look at 2 components in terms of the rating scale. So a project will get up to a maximum of 1 point for something we're calling safety strategy. And that could either be a defined FHWA proven safety countermeasure, 4 or 5 star rating from the CMF clearinghouse, and then sort of, it sort of lays it down from that. But it's sort of looking at the strategy side. The second component is you can get up to I believe it's half a point for location or criticality. So is it on a network? And it varies between Pennsylvania and New Jersey, but basically, is it located on an HSIP eligible state roadway?
Great, thanks. Okay, so we're just about out of time. Hey, let me say huge thanks, Harlan, Brian, Dave, Michael. Really appreciate your perspectives, federal, state, kind of local. That was awesome. Thanks, Melissa, for helping us out with this platform. Matt Smoker behind the scenes helping me out. We really appreciate everything. I think we are headed towards a break from 1:30 to 1:45 if you're still participating in the conference. So at 1:45, the next sessions will start. But again, thank you all very much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
You know, I'm
Yep.
going to stop the broadcast. Thanks.